What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several close range tips that should help you play better and win more fights in Fortnite. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, comment down below which shotgun is your favorite from throughout all of Fortnite history. And also, this video is going to be focused on Zero Build. Some of this will apply to either game mode, but this is a Zero Build video. So typically, throughout all of Fortnite, close range fights have been the most important fights in the game, and the fights that often decide the outcome of the game. Because of the way the ranged weapons play, how many heals people typically carry, and how much mobility there is in the game, it's unlikely you're just going to 250 to 0 somebody at long range unless they're not a very good player. Like, a decent player is not just going to sit there and let you eliminate them long range like that. Like, it'll happen sometimes, but a majority of time, you're going to have to close the gap on somebody and get in a close range fight. And then on the flip side of this, the better players also know this, and so they're going to be trying to push you and eliminate you that way. And so this is a very important skill to have if you do want to get better at Fortnite. I think like the biggest kind of gap between some people, between like an average player and a good player, is going to be like how fast they play and, you know, how well they play close range fights. Throughout all of Fortnite, shotguns have dominated close range fights, and this is something that sometimes gets kind of called into question. I notice it happens a lot whenever we get new shotguns. I remember at the start of Chapter 6, people are like, these shotguns are terrible. I'm just going to use the Fury AR and no shotgun. And then I've seen it a decent amount with the Star Wars season as well, where players are like, these shotguns are terrible. I'm just going to use an F11 and spray. And the reason why shotguns dominate the close range meta typically is they allow you to do a lot of damage in a single shot, which lends itself well to playing off of cover or playing off of movement and really reducing the chances that the enemy has to deal damage on you and making the fight harder for your enemy, so you end up taking less damage. With like a spray weapon, we've definitely had like the Fury AR, the collateral damage AR, even some of the spray weapons this season. You can definitely 250 to 0 somebody with them, sure. And that maybe works several times throughout the course of the game. But typically this is a playstyle where you're just trading damage with the enemy. It's a bit of a coin flip. And even if you do win the fight, you're expending a lot of HP and making yourself an easier target for enemies. If you're just spraying somebody with an SMG up close, you're probably trying to walk forward and barrel stuff them the entire time. You know, you're not jiggle peeking cover. You're not like playing right shoulder peeks well. It's something that's more of just like barrel stuff, walk forward. And so your movement is more predictable and you're trading a lot of damage in fights. And that is why shotguns typically dominate, because when you play off of cover well with a shotgun or you play your movement well with a shotgun, you get a lot of damage in an instant. Try to put yourself in a situation where you're no longer exposed to the enemy, and then rinse and repeat that over the course of the fight. The biggest, and then also shotguns lend themselves to hip firing really well, which is going to allow you to focus on your movement. And that is going to be our first tip, is that you need to find a sensitivity that you feel comfortable hip firing with. I said earlier, one of the gaps between like an average player and a good player is often close range fights. And one of those key indicators, I think, is how comfortable they feel hip firing in close range. Because typically with your shotgun, you're going to want to be hip firing. It's more of a close range weapon anyways. You shouldn't need to aim. We've had some range shotguns which were kind of different, but for the most part, you want to be hip firing your shotgun in close range. And the reason for this is because when you aim in, you lower your sensitivity. And a lot of people feel like they need to do this to control their aim. But in close range fights, this can actually be a hindrance because of how much movement matters. When you aim in and lower your sensitivity, any movement the enemy makes is going to be harder for you to track and to adjust to. So if they jump right before you shoot, or as you're going to shoot, they might just completely dodge your shot altogether because you were aimed in and slow. And then also when you're aiming in, especially if you're like hard aiming in, if you just tap it, that's one thing. But if you're hard aiming in, your movement is going to be a lot worse because your character is moving slower when you're aiming in. You're probably focusing too much on hitting the shot and not enough on your movement. And also you can't be like jumping and stuff while doing this. And so you make your opponent more capable of dodging your shots. And then you also make yourself easier to hit by not being comfortable hip firing. And so I would highly suggest finding a sensitivity that feels comfortable to hip fire with you. That will go a long way in this game. Aiming in with shotguns can be fine in certain situations. Like if you're playing off of cover and you have somebody pushing into you, or it is like a bit of a slower fight, that's one thing. But like a chaotic fight that's kind of scrappy, you don't want to be doing that. And it's like, it's one of those things where it can be helpful in some situations, but it's not like, you don't want that to be your go-to. You don't want it to be a requirement. And that's how I feel like some people feel because they don't feel comfortable hip firing with their sensitivity. Another settings problem that players can kind of run into, and this is mainly a controller player problem, is going to be that you need settings, or you want settings that allow you to jump or crouch, also jump and crouch, while still having control of your crosshair, because the default controller binds with a default grip and default controller, I believe, require you to take your thumb off the stick to jump and crouch. And so if you're taking your right thumb off the analog stick to jump, you can't be jumping and aiming fluidly at the same time. There's going to be that little gap where your thumb is going back and forth, right? And that can be the difference maker in a game that is decided by milliseconds at times. And so that is why paddled controllers have become such a thing in the communities for like shooter games on controller, like Call of Duty, Apex, Halo, Fortnite now. Paddled controllers allow you to have buttons on the back of your controller. But you can also find keybinds that work for you. Maybe like playing bumper jumper or something, putting jump on one of the bumpers and like L1, R1, and then crouch on right stick. There's ways you can get creative with the binds. But the easiest way to have optimal binds on controller is going to be to get a paddled controller. My sponsor AIM will be linked down in the description below. They have, custom controllers with all the bells and whistles. But finding settings that make it to where you can use your movement well and track players with hipfire, I think, is essential if you want to be good in close range. And the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be your movement, because this is something that is also incredibly important, sometimes even more so important than aim. So I made a video dedicated entirely to movement a few weeks ago that goes in more detail about it. I will link that in the description. But basically, you just want to make fighting you as annoying as it possibly can be for your opponent. Doing things like jumping and sliding in close range fights can make it harder for you to track and harder for your opponent to keep up with. And in some cases, you are able to completely break their camera if you like jump and land in the slide behind them, especially if they're kind of going around a corner as you do this. If you can end up behind your opponent in a close range fight, you should 100% win it at that point. And even if you aren't able to break their camera that way, like just, jumping, sliding, being evasive, like think about what would be easier for you to fight against. Would you rather fight against someone who just stands still and doesn't do anything, or someone who's really erratic and difficult to track? Like, it's probably going to be easier for you to fight against the person who's just standing still. And this is another thing that you can kind of tell some players who aren't as experienced with the game. They do kind of just stand still in those close range fights, and it makes it very easy to eliminate them. Combined with your movement, another thing that's going to be really important in close range fight is going to be using mobility. So like any sort of trees or rocks or even cars that you have around you, being able to play off this cover well, and like I talked about at the start of the video, hit a pump shot and then go back into cover, and then maybe use your movement to slide out as they're pushing you. Like, there's a whole separate meta game that kind of develops around playing around cover in this game, and doing that well is important. If every close range fight is just you and the opponent standing out in the open trading damage, you probably aren't going to consistently win, because that's a bit of a coin flip playstyle, but also you're making yourself an easier target for third parties. Not only people medium to long range just, cleaning you up with their AR, but also the fact that you're taking more damage playing like this can come back to bite you. There is going to be fights where you're just out in the open or whatever, and you and the opponent are having that like scrappy fight, more exposed, but you don't want that to be the norm. Like, battle royales are a game where like anything can really happen, and you'll get into a variety of different situations, and you'll get into some bad fights and some bad situations, but you don't want that to be the norm or the thing that you go to all the time. So learning how to use cover in close range fights is incredibly important. And a lot of times that is how it's going to play out anyways, but we'll get to that in a bit in one of the next few tips. So weapon swapping is also going to be something that is a very big deal in close range fights, because the pump shotguns have typically been the best shotguns for a vast majority of Fortnite's, lifespan. There have been times where the auto shotgun is better, but for the most part, the pumps are better. And the reason why you want to weapon swap well is because the way the pump shotguns work in Fortnite is you shoot and then pump. There's like a delay to being able to shoot again. But the game doesn't actually care about that animation. It just cares that there's time between shots. And so you can shoot your pump, swap to some sort of spray weapon, get damage in the time where your pump wouldn't have been usable anyways, and then swap back to your pump to hopefully hit a finishing blow. If you hit the first pump shot for like 100, you spray for like 60 or 70, and then swap back to the pump for another 100, that's a quick, clean kill in a very like snap time span. And doing that well, while also tracking the enemy, while also using movement to your advantage is one of those signs that I talked about at the start of the video, where you can just tell very easily watching somebody the difference between an average player and a good player when it comes to these situations. So you want to fill the time between your pump shots with some sort of damage from your spray weapon. And the Star Wars season kind of makes this really easy because you don't have to worry about ammo or reloading. You don't have to worry about like if your SMG was loaded when you swap to it, because they're just always loaded because of the way the overheat system works. So getting that weapon swapping down and just maximizing your damage potential is very, very important. Like if you're just sitting there shooting the pump constantly and not swapping, you're doing nothing in the time between pump shots probably, where you could be getting spray damage. This is mainly going to be in those scrappier situations though. If you're playing off of cover, and you know, timing your peaks well, it's not the end of the world to just stay on the pump the entire time. But in those scrappier situations, or if you're exposed to the enemy while like in between pump shots, you want to be swapping to some sort of spray weapon. A lot of these movement and aiming skills and just kind of making those small decisions quickly in the heat of the moment and not fumbling it just comes down to muscle memory and mechanical skill. And these are both things that take time and experience to build. You're not just going to wake up one day, or you're not just going to watch this video and automatically be better at close range fights. Some things, you know, can help right away, but at the end of the day, it's like a skill and a play style you need to develop. And the only way you're really going to develop that and get better at that is getting in close range fights and forcing fights and, you know, making yourself get better over time. A lot of players, when they start playing, they end up playing incredibly passive because they just want to win. And then this playstyle kind of persists for a really long time. And the amount of experience they're getting in fighting compared to the amount of time they're playing is just a very bad ratio, because you'll have players that hide for, you know, a 20-minute match and maybe get in 3 fights. Like, the amount of time spent to the amount of fights they got in kind of means they're not going to get much better at actually fighting. And what a lot of players have happen is they get wins this way and it works for them. But because the matchmaking system of the game tries to match you with people that perform similarly, if you're getting wins playing very passively, you're probably going to hit a wall where, you know, it's just much harder for you to win because you're fighting much better players, because the game thinks you're a better player because you were, you know, getting wins and making it deep in the game. And so if you do want to actually improve, a lot of time you're going to have to worry more about actually improving and not actually winning in the game. And BRs, the nature of the game, they aren't the greatest games at getting reps in quickly. But reload mode or creative mode can be much more ideal for practice, because there's much less downtime between fights and there's much less penalty for losing a fight. If you're playing a solo game, you probably take a few minutes to find a match and load in. You lose the first fight you get in, that's probably like 5 to 6 minutes, you know, where you just got one fight. But in creative mode, you could get in 10 plus fights in that time span. And this is just like any sort of like creative deathmatch where you can fight people. The practice might not always be the best, but it's like the reps that really count, especially if you're trying to build, you know, if you're trying to get used to new settings, if you're trying to build the habit of, you know, hip firing your shotgun, if you're trying to build the habit of weapon swapping, if you're trying to get better at movement. All of these things can be practiced in creative mode or reload mode. Some people prefer reload, but the way I look at it is like BR is terribly efficient for like time spent fighting. Reload is a bit more efficient, and then creative is the most efficient. So if you just want to get in as many fights as fast as possible, creative mode is going to be your best bet. And the final thing I want to talk about when it comes to winning close range fights is going to be to win them before they even start. And what I mean by this is getting opening damage to start the fight and then pushing the opponent. And when I talked about like playing off of cover and I said we'd come back to it, this is what I was talking about. So if you're just jumping on a full HP opponent and trying to fight them close range, you can win fights that way, but it can be somewhat of a coin flippy playstyle because of how hard the shotguns hit and because of what I talked about before with like getting third partied. You know, the easiest way to win your close range fights is to open with some sort of, you know, medium range AR damage and then use mobility to get on the opponent, take advantage of your early advantage and press that to get an elimination. And at the very start of the video, I talked about how like a good player isn't just going to let you 250 to 0 them at medium range. They're going to get to some sort of cover. This is when you push and you make it a close range fight. So a lot of fights that kind of start out as medium range fights end up ending as close range fights. And you need to be able to get on them and, you know, finish that kill and take advantage of your advantage rather than just letting them slip and get away and heal and maybe be a problem later. And a lot of times what's going to happen is you get like, you know, let's just say 100 damage. You get 100 damage, you shockwave on them. You're probably playing around some sort of piece of cover now, whether it's a tree, a rock, a bush, whatever, because if there wasn't cover, you probably would have eliminated them, right? Now comes the time where, you know, you're focusing on your right shoulder peaks, you're focusing on playing around cover, you're focusing on maybe like sprint jumping around the tree or rock and breaking their camera. All of these things that we already talked about, or I talked about in the movement video I linked below. A lot of it all gets used at once in those situations, and that's how a lot of fights in Fortnite Zero Build at least are going to play out, is with some sort of opening tag, push into the kill. When you start with this opening damage, you make your life easier because you already have an HP advantage. You already have the opponent on the back foot, and all the pressure and all the, you know, the ball is in your court. And so starting fights with opening damage and then pushing to get the kill is much preferred to just jumping on everybody that you see, regardless of what their HP is like. If you know people are fighting and you want to third party it, that's one thing. But if you assume somebody is full HP or you know nothing about them, you don't want to be forcing that close range fight. You want to be hopefully getting opening tags first. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.